Let's talk about death. I know when you saw the title of my talk, you probably got a little shifty in your seats. Maybe you're a little curious too. But let's face it, you'd probably rather hear a talk about almost anything else, anything other than your inevitable death. But I'm here, and I thank you, TEDxKingStWomen, for the invite, to tell you that we are all going to die. Hopefully none of us in the next 15 minutes, but we all will someday, in some way, cease to be alive. There is a momentum going on here. With every heartbeat, with every breath, we are that much closer to our end. So, what's a girl to do with that existential reality of her mortality? The point of this talk is simply to challenge us to embrace it. Around the world, people embrace death. In Mexico, families hold wakes in their homes. Actually, it's more like keeping a party going around the body of a loved one before they carry them in procession to the church and the cemetery. In India, Hindu rituals are required before sundown on the day a person dies. The family gathers for a ceremonial cleansing of the body, and the eldest son lights the cremation pyre. In Tibetan Buddhist sky burial, the body of a loved one is offered up to the birds and the animals in a final act of generosity, demonstrating respect for all living things as death feeds life. Perhaps it's easier to embrace death when it's near at hand. There are certainly places in the world who live more closely with the reality of their mortality due to famine or violence or lack of access to health care. Death is a frequent companion some places, and people know how to keep its company. People mourn their dead. They wash and dress and carry and bury them. They have rituals to remember, to send them off. We die here too in Canada, though perhaps at a later age and differently. We die of heart disease or diabetes. We don't like to think about it, but some of us do let that consciousness in just enough to want to do what we can to delay our demise. We might exercise or eat right. We monitor our health. But somewhere between that point and our inevitable death, we seem to have forgotten as a society what to do. I'm 42 years old right now, but if I make it to 62, StatsCan tells me that my community's demographic will look quite different. The silver tsunami, that's 1,000 baby boomers turning 65 each day in the next 20 years, will increase the proportion of our senior citizens to 1/4 of the population. It's just 14% now. In 50 years, if I make it to 92, the number of deaths per year in Canada will be double what it is today. And how will this silver tsunami die? Well, Hospice Palliative Care Canada found that most of us indicate that we would prefer to die at home in the presence of our loved ones. Yet almost 70% of Canadian deaths occur in a hospital. A recent Ontario study showed that 84% of people who died of cancer between 2002 and 2005 visited the emergency department within the last 6 months of their lives. And 40% of those visited ER within the last 2 weeks of their lives. So clearly, in Canada, more and more of us will be dying, and we will be dying hooked to tubes and machines and ICUs after surgeries and procedures that may only be buying us a few more days or weeks. We say we don't want that. We say we want a peaceful death at home, but we can't seem to manage it. And then there's after death. We give that part of the story even less thought. Perhaps we can thank the US field doctors who figured out how to embalm fallen Civil War soldiers for their long cart rides home. Or maybe we should thank the 1950s funeral industry ad men for selling us fear of our dead and our need for their products and services to protect ourselves from them. But somewhere along the way, we got lost. So let me tell you a story about how it tends to go for us right here, right now. Sadly, I might get cancer. I will fight it with radiation and chemo and maybe surgery. But if I lose that battle, I may be lucky enough to find excellent palliative care at home or in hospice. But according to the stats, it's more likely that I will die full of tubes in an ICU. My family will be notified, and they may see me for an hour or two before my body is taken to the hospital morgue. From there, a funeral director or a transport service will pick up my body, and unless someone notices or objects, my family will be asked to sign off on the package deal. This will include embalming, which is the draining of my blood and the replacing of it with a formaldehyde-based preservative, puncturing of my internal organs and aspirating the contents, and then refilling my abdominal cavity with chemicals, which unfortunately have the added effect of being carcinogenic to the mortuary workers. Then they will stitch me up, wire and glue me up into a posture of repose. They will make me look almost not dead. My family will purchase an expensive casket, the cost of which they will have been convinced demonstrates their love for me, and which will supposedly protect me from the elements. They will get to see me for a few more hours at the funeral home while all of our friends and family file past. And then eventually I'll go by hearse to the cemetery, where my casket will be placed in a cement vault underground. Again, my family will assume that this vault serves the purpose of protecting my body somehow, but its actual purpose will be to prevent the ground from sinking just a little over me with time, making it easier for the groundskeepers to mow. This is the usual storyline, maybe with a slightly different fiery cremation ending, but it's how it tends to go. And really, how awful. I think at every turn, at every choice along that way, we could have done better. I've spent my life recycling and composting, buying local and organic, riding my bike and volunteering in my community, snuggling with my children and making new friends. But this ending doesn't speak to any of that. In fact, it opposes almost everything I believed in and gave myself to, with the medicalization and institutionalization of my dying, the outsourcing of my death care, the invasion of my body and the toxic chemicals, the lack of proximity to my family and friends, and the limits on my community's involvement. Ultimately, the pollution of the earth or the air with my body and its trappings. But the whole point of telling you this sad, typical story of a march to the grave is to tell you that better is possible. We can die and care for our dead better. We can face our cultural alienation from death head on, and I think it starts with love of our family and friends, of our communities, and of our earth. How will we die in a way worthy of our lives? How will we teach and relearn what it means to live into our dying in a way that contributes to our communities and protects our environment? I'll suggest 4 first steps. 1, let's start thinking about it. It may seem counterintuitive, but studies have shown that people who contemplate their mortality daily actually have a less depressed mood, greater success in achieving health and fitness goals, and greater satisfaction with their life circumstances. Research also shows that considering death leads us to greater acts of kindness and compassion in our relationships with others. Ultimately, thinking about death helps us put things in perspective. Our priorities shift in our work, in our finances, and personal relationships. When we think about the reality of death, we appreciate being alive. Next, let's start talking about it and writing it down. If we prefer to die differently than most Canadians do, in the hospital, undergoing aggressive medical interventions, we need to start talking about what we want and what we don't want. Advanced care planning, which is talking about our options and preferences for end-of-life medical care with our family and friends and with our healthcare providers, it's imperative. There are wonderful resources put out by the Government of Ontario. They're online and they're free, and these can help to start the conversation. When and how will we choose to decline futile, life-protracting care? When and how will we choose comfort care in home or in hospice at the end of life to ease more gently into death? We need to talk about it before the time comes with everyone we can, and we need to write it down. Next, let's teach each other how to die and how to care for our dead. Almost everywhere else in the world and throughout human history, people died in their homes. Cared for by family and friends, the sick and elderly were present realities, demonstrating the stages of how bodies shut down, how people lose consciousness and slip into death. People used to know what dying looked like. It wasn't always peaceful or pretty, but at least it wasn't a terrifying unknown. We can teach our children and grandchildren what dying is about. We can become less fearful and better able to compassionately care, to grieve and let go. And after we die, our bodies can stay at home or return home to be cared by our loved ones. This is the way we used to do it, the way it was always done. Many people are surprised to learn that it is, in fact, perfectly safe and legal in every province of Canada for families to wash and dress and lay out the bodies of their loved ones at home. But quite apart from it being our legal right, consider that caring for a loved one after death might be the hardest, best thing we'll ever do, taking that opportunity to grieve and say goodbye. Our dying and death could actually become a gift to our communities. Friends become involved in the many tasks of after-death care and arrangements, grateful for an opportunity to demonstrate concern rather than feeling at a loss for what to do. People can keep vigil for a few days, sharing stories, eating and drinking, celebrating a life and grieving a death. We can return death to its place in the circle of life. Finally, let's choose in death what we value in life. We need to give some serious thought to the impact that our funeral practices have on the natural environment. We spend our lives fighting for clean air and water, protecting wildlife, but when it comes to death, our environmental consciousness comes to a screeching halt. We need to consider funeral alternatives that are affordable, sustainable, and ecological. Choosing to forgo embalming chemicals, foregoing metal and hardwood caskets, and using only biodegradable funerary products, that's a start. Many people think incorrectly that cremation is an environmentally friendly option, but cremation, in fact, requires a staggering amount of fuel energy and results in significant carbon and mercury emissions. Natural burial, on the other hand, which is burial of an unembalmed body in a biodegradable coffin or shroud without a cement vault, it keeps the overall carbon footprint low. And talk about leaving a legacy. Natural burial in a forest or conservation area protects that land from development forever. It preserves it for future generations and supports natural habitats. We can essentially save forests by planting ourselves. When I say that, I feel hopeful. I feel the momentum of a revolution in how we deal with death. I imagine movement toward community-centered, environmentally conscious dying and death care. I imagine death, much as the process of birth, being reclaimed by our families and communities as a natural, accepted, honored part of life. I imagine us claiming our place in a more compassionate cycle of life and death as we care for others and are cared for ourselves. Thank you.